Hello and welcome back to the Movie Memo Recaps. Today we are going to recap a 2018 movie titled River Runs Red. Please be advised that there will be spoilers ahead. In the opening scene, we are introduced to a young father, Charles Coleman, talking to his son CJ about his childhood hero, Muhammad Ali, who stood by everything he believed, even though it meant losing everything he worked so hard for. They play together momentarily before CJ hands his father a drawing of his family. As he admires his son's work, CJ asks whether black people are better than white people. Charles wisely tells his son that there are good and bad people, regardless of race. CJ's mother Eve then joins them after work. Charles, who is also a college law student, finds it challenging to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent. The professor scornfully asks him to read a case aloud to his classmates as if he were in grade school. Years later, an all-grown-up CJ joins his parents for breakfast. It's CJ's first day at the police academy, and his parents are proud of him. Eve, who is now a police officer, hugs him and wishes him well before leaving for work. CJ and his dad tease each other back and forth before leaving. CJ takes one of his dad's cars and happily drives off. Charles meets his old friend, Detective Horace, and they briefly talk about their children and their fears as parents to young adults. In another scene, Officer Vaughn plays with a group of black kids in a park and suggests to Officer Rory that he would love his son Carter to play with those kids. Rory responds in a racist manner, instructing Officer Vaughn to find more suitable children for his son to play with. As they leave, Vaughn asks about Rory's ailing father, and he says that his condition has not changed. Charles is a city judge and is presiding over a court proceeding involving a young black man who shows remorse for his actions. Although he does not grant him probation, he does impose a house arrest, which is followed by a 2-year probation defense. While driving, CJ is watching a video of his mother congratulating him. CJ sees Rory in Vaughn's patrol car and gestures to acknowledge them, but Rory interprets it as flipping. They start chasing after him, and he pulls over. At the traffic stop, they ask for his license, which he calmly reaches for in his bag in the back seat. This leads Vaughn to believe that he is reaching for a gun, prompting both of them to shoot at him out of fear for their lives. After checking through his bag, they realize they made a mistake, and he was just reaching for his license. Rory immediately devises a plan to plant a gun on him in order to absolve himself of any wrongdoing. Eve arrives at the scene and is heartbroken to see his son dead. Judge Coleman goes to the morgue to view his son's body and is also devastated by his son's demise. That evening, Vaughn returns home, a cloud of guilt from covering up a murder looming over him as he watches his son drift off to sleep. Judge Coleman's residence hosts a gathering of friends and family, but Vaughn is too overcome with grief to join them. Before they go to bed, Eve declares that she is quitting her job since she cannot work in the same system that killed their son. He persuades Charles to leave his job, but says he's come too far to quit, noting that he is the only black judge the town has ever had. He further says that by being a judge, he stands to make a more significant change for the black community than if he quits. Eve, however, disagrees with him, saying that CJ was a decent kid, but the system still killed him. In an auto repair shop owned by a man named Javier, a group of men bring in a wounded man, Diego. Diego, wounded after straying into another gang's territory, seeks Javier's assistance. Javier urges him to go to the hospital and promises to get him a lawyer and bail him out. The next morning, Charles hears on the radio about a Black Lives Matter campaign honoring CJ, but he dismisses it, asserting that CJ is not the cause. Charles then meets Horace, who tells him it will be impossible to determine whether CJ had a gun. However, Charles remains relatively confident that his son did not possess a weapon and is a victim of a false accusation. At the precinct, Rory urges Vaughn to stick to the story, pointing out that the truth will not bring CJ back to life. He justifies their actions by blaming CJ for reaching for his bag and instructs Vaughn to look out for himself. Rory then runs into Charles and shows no remorse for his actions. Vaughn briefly joins them, filled with self-reproach, feeling devastated and at a loss for words. Rory stands his ground, declaring that he will not apologize for carrying out his duties. Charles pledges to utilize his resources to ensure he faces consequences for his actions. Vaughn then attends his hearing and reiterates Rory's account of fearing for his life, which led him to take action. Charles then meets with the mayor, the Department of Justice Hinkle, and the chief of police, Mallard, to discuss the investigation into officers Vaughn and Rory. Mayor Johnson tells him that they unanimously decided not to charge the police officers since there was no evidence implicating them in wrongdoing. DOJ Hinkle further says that the federal government had also signed off on it, and Chief Mallard adds that they all relied on the officers' testimonies. The justice system encourages him to support this decision, recognizing that the police cannot face punishment for performing their duties every time. The mayor then offers him a settlement, which Charles declines and leaves the room. Charles calls Horace and asks for help finding answers for Eve's sake. Horace collaborates with Internal Affairs and enters the file room to investigate Vaughn and Rory. He finds some dirt on Rory, takes photos, and emails them to Charles. Charles decides to visit the victim's parents after the files reveal that Rory committed a similar murder. He meets the mother, who gives him the location of her husband's auto repair shop, but is upset that he is asking about his late son. Javier is not so pleased to see a man digging around about his son's Ralphie murder. He breaks Coleman's window and attacks him, but Coleman tells him that he is just there asking for help. Javier calms down but tells Coleman that it will be almost impossible to sue the city and get justice since the police cannot snitch on each other. Coleman narrates that Eve got pregnant when they were 17, and he vowed to work his way up without giving up. Unfortunately, Javier doesn't think they can win and won't play. The mayor's secretary informs the mayor that a reporter is asking for details about the murder, and the mayor gives the green light to publish the details. Meanwhile, Vaughn lets slip to his wife Mary that CJ did not have a weapon, which angers her. Mary tells him he must stop acting like a coward and own up to his mistakes. Vaughn says that Rory's plan and story protect them, but Mary tells him to stay away from her and their son Carter. Javier tries to bring himself to look at his son's photo but cannot. The following day, Judge Coleman meets Marcy, a mother to another victim of police brutality. Marcy is not interested in pursuing justice and says she forgave those who killed him. She compares justice to taking revenge. She believes that a man incarcerated for years for stealing a loaf of bread does not constitute justice. When she was 17, she was caught riding a stolen vehicle, and after taking a plea, she was deemed a felon. Her whole life, she has missed out on opportunities such as employment and quality education just because of a mistake she made as a teenager. She implores Coleman to strive for inner peace, as a fixation on justice could lead him to lose sight of life. Later that evening, Javier talks to his wife about their late son and tells her how much he misses him. He points out that he was wrong for not pursuing justice for his son, but his wife tells him that his son chose the gangster life for himself. At their home, Coleman treats his wife to Chinese food, and they savor every moment while listening to music. They then go to bed, as do Javier and his wife, indicating that both families have chosen to be at peace with their son's demise. 6 months later, both Coleman and Eve read in the news that CJ had a gun, suggesting that he was a thug. Eve confronts Charles for not doing anything to get justice for his son. She reminds him that he has consistently achieved everything he set his eyes on, including getting a degree, becoming a lawyer, and even becoming a judge. It is therefore hard for her to understand why it has been difficult for him to get justice for their son. Coleman encounters the mayor, who denies knowing who leaked the news. Coleman shows the mayor a photo of the gun found on CJ, noting that Rory was at both Javier's son's crime scenes. The mayor informs him that the evidence is beyond him and unprovable. He also tells him that the city offered him money, but he declined. Later that evening, Coleman visits Javier and urges him to take action, citing the denial of justice. He also informs Javier that his son Ralphie's death was not due to a gang rivalry, as the police had claimed, but rather due to the police's own actions. Javier remains unwilling to become involved and requests that he leave. Coleman tells him that the gun found on CJ was still the one found on Ralphie's crime scene before showing him footage of how his son died, and this upsets him. He points a gun at Coleman, saying he was also part of the system that denied justice to his son. Charles acknowledges that he also gave the justice system a chance, but it failed him, forcing them to take matters into their own hands. With sufficient information about the officers, the two grieving fathers prepare to exact revenge for their sons' deaths. Coleman gets a gun and takes CJ's drawing with him. Masked and armed, Javier breaks into Rory's house, where a hand-to-hand fight ensues. Rory subdues Javier, and just as Rory is about to shoot him, Coleman bursts in, firing. After the shooting stops, Rory informs Coleman that his father not only taught him how to select the best Cuban cigar, but also stressed the importance of choosing a side. As a judge, Coleman was on his side, and if he had known CJ was his son, he would not have killed him. The shooting begins again, and Charles kills Rory. As they drive off, Coleman says their sons would be proud. Detective Horace arrives at Rory's house. After viewing the crime scene, description of suspects, and evidence of CJ's ID, he discovers that the shooter could be Coleman. He instructs several officers to rescue Vaughn, who may be in danger. Unaware of the situation, Vaughn hesitates to leave, but receives assurance that an officer will protect his family. Horace then calls Eve and asks her if she's seen Charles. Eve says that he is trying to do the right thing. Some detectives recognize them at a red light, forcing them to flee and drive off. The detectives chase after them, and the chase ends in a warehouse. Javier and Coleman do not want to kill anyone, so they fight them off while telling them to stand down. As they exit, another detective shoots at them, but they tell her that her partners are injured but not dead, and they don't want any trouble. The officer lets them walk. They then steal a car and keep driving. As they escort Vaughn to safety, he questions their motive. A black male informs him of Rory's death. Coleman then spots the police car transporting Vaughn, and they make a U-turn to chase after it. They hit the police car from behind and continued to pursue it on the busy highway. While the police were firing at them, Coleman and Javier continued to drive recklessly, which led them to lose control and crash. The officer protecting Vaughn get out of their car, but Javier and Coleman gun them down. A police helicopter has also caught up with them, but this does not prevent them from reaching Vaughn. Coleman displays CJ's drawing to Vaughn and informs him of his impending murder trial. As the two fathers point their guns at him, Vaughn, on his knees, begs them not to kill him, citing his son's presence. Coleman informs Vaughn that he, too, had a son, but they took him away. Vaughn apologizes and informs Coleman that CJ didn't have a gun, which causes Coleman to tip over, leading to Vaughn being shot. Following this, the on-scene police immediately shoot Javier and Coleman. The movie ends with the police notifying Vaughn's wife about his husband's demise, the mayor watching the shootout on the news, and Eve trying to reach her husband. Thanks for watching. If you are new, don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, have a nice day.